I think with AI, the thing to remember, it's only going to bring you back what you ask it. So you've got to be very specific in what you ask it.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
Protecting the C-suite. Today, Shaun West and myself are delighted to be discussing a great interview with Jason Bolwell, Global Executive Protection Manager at BP. Shaun, how are you doing?
I'm good. Got over the Christmas period now. Happy New Year to everybody who's listening.
Yes, Happy New Year, and what a start to the year. Lots of things going on in the world, which is kind of timely because our session today with Jason looks at multiple threat vectors to the C-suite. Of course, this can include new types of protest, new types of activism, new types of radicalization, and I suppose that big moral quandary about your own personal exposure to threats that you want to take on or don't want to take on. Why is this an important topic, particularly this year, Shaun?
Well, I think it is because there's so much changing in the world. I think with AI, artificial intelligence, the threat landscape has changed fundamentally, and that's been coming over the last few years. And I think when people talk about protecting senior executives, we instinctively think about the physical side, the routes, the venues, the advanced work, all of that. But increasingly, the risks are beginning online because they can find out so much more information about your executives now than what they previously could. So the basic guy on the ground who maybe not have had access to certain tools previously has now got a full toolbox in their pocket, which they can use to find more and more information which they couldn't previously. So that has definitely raised the threat level of what people, where is your executive speaking? What events are they attending? That information is so widely available, not just through open source intelligence tools, but to the regular person on the ground who may have an interest in your principle.
And perhaps that's the difference between maybe years gone by, is that the degree to which a regular person on the ground can develop an unhealthy interest from not caring. Perhaps there are algorithms at work, perhaps there's motivation, or perhaps it's just how things are. But it would seem that everybody could potentially rapidly develop an unhealthy interest in your principle.
Yeah, I think that digital exposure now is now crossing into that physical side. So many of the executive protection agents, it's crossing into that physical security side where maybe they haven't been trained for. So this is now an area maybe for upskilling, maybe more training. What can these people find out? Maybe doing a search on your own principle yourself if you haven't done that already. What information is available out there, and actually reverse engineering and seeing what people can find. And I think as a personal protection officer, this should be a tool that everybody's looking at now. And this should be, I'd imagine we're going to see more and more training courses, education pieces coming out that people can access to help grow the toolbox that the executive protection agent has also.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people train for kinetic incidents, but there are a lot of incidents that could deal with embarrassment or perhaps disruption. And one of the things that was in the news was people who were performing citizens' arrests on executives. Well, the challenge there is, should you use of force on 80-year-old pensioners who form a circle around a principal? Well, I would probably say no, but then they're detaining them, and then is that lawful? And then what are your rights? What are your obligations? And what about the optics? Even if you're permitted to disperse some pensioners that form a circle around your principal, it's on camera. So should you? Like these don't seem like normal EP questions.
No, it's not. And honestly, I mean, I've been in the industry now, God, over 20 years. And you've seen an awful lot. And there's many times over that 20 years, there's things that get put on your desk that can test your moral compass. I know you'll have people that will go right and they'll turn the other cheek, or they get involved. And I think each situation is different on its own merit, and you've got to take it, deal with it. You know what your job is. You know who you're protecting. There's things that's going to come in. Maybe you see them and they're doing something wrong, and it's going to impact your moral compass. Which way do I go? And I think there's really, certainly in the world of executive protection, it can bring an awful lot of dilemmas along the way, the situations you get put in. And definitely, this isn't taught on a CP course. It'll be touched upon, but I think until you spend time on the ground and you're exposed, you get increased exposure to these situations. That's when you grow as an agent. The more things you deal with, the more confident you become in your decision making. And it's like, you mentioned there, these protests that can come up from out of nowhere. And a great, people could be walking around blissfully unaware. But I think anybody, anywhere now, you don't know what they're going through in their life. Anybody could become a threat. So I think great model that, is taught in some CP courses was the Cooper Colour Codes. Instead of walking around like 90% of the population blissfully unaware, when you're working on the ground, we should be walking around in that code yellow, where you've got a bit upgraded situational awareness. And if something pricks your spider senses, then you're stepping up to the next level. Okay, and then you're taking, further action, adjusting your posture. But I don't think, the way the world is today, I don't think any of us can walk around in that code white, blissfully unaware. I think even just walking the streets, we all have to have some form of situational awareness.
Absolutely, which means discounting nobody as well. Well, I'm excited for this. Yes, it's a bit of a macro topic, but I think high time we address it, and great for this year's podcast. We're looking at protecting the C-suite with Jason Bolwell.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit magazine.
C-suite protection. Today, we're very pleased to welcome Jason Bolwell, Global Executive Protection Manager at BP. How are you doing, Jason?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Alan. Nice to speak to you again.
Well, lovely to have you on. And I guess initially, C-suite protection is what most of the Circuit Magazine podcast is about, at least on the corporate side. What's the problem we're trying to solve?
I think over the last couple of years, we've seen a massive change in the way that we need to protect the C-suite. And, historically, it's always been the physical protection of executives. And AI has changed that picture. Now we need to look at how we protect them digitally and from a cyber perspective. And those three assets of digital, cyber, and physical are all interlinked. They can all be used against the executives, and they can all be used by the protectors.
Well, I like that, because then, maybe I could frame it as like C-suite protection for the new year, or what's new, or, because it is important to really address this changing landscape. But obviously, we're thrilled to have you on, but where does your passion for this come from?
Certainly my passion for protecting the C-suite and the changes that AI is making. Over the last 3 years, I've done an MBA with Arden University, and my final research paper was on the effects of AI on executive protection. And the more you looked into it and the more you looked at the stats, over the last 3 years, AI has grown 30% annually. Well, if you multiply that going forward, any protector who is not looking at the threat from AI and how that's changing how we protect the C-suite needs to have a wake-up call.
Yeah, absolutely, and very much in front of people's minds, or many people's minds. But for the uninitiated, obviously, all protectors are somewhat initiated in protecting a version of the C-suite, but for the uninitiated, what should they better understand about this transition, this evolution?
I think they need to understand that the profile of the people that they are protecting, whether that's their data from social media or whether actually that's data about them attending events or their travel movements is much more out there in the public domain. And AI as a scraping tool can give the threat actor much more information about the person the uninitiated is protecting. And they need to understand that and look at measures they could put in place to protect their protectee better.
That's good, yeah, because then they need to realize that it is applicable to them, not just something that's far off, or something for the team lead, or something for some other person. But then let's explore it. What is new? What new vectors are we seeing on the ground to principals, to the C-suite today?
I think it's as we look through the last 12 months, there's definitely been an increase in threat to four main sectors: healthcare, banking, finance, energy, and pharmaceuticals. And that was obviously highlighted by the death of the Unitrust Healthcare in New York last year, or was it this year? Threat actors are being supercharged by stuff they see online. That also has seen an increase in online attacks. Constantly negative on social media towards C-suite executives. And quite a lot of people seem to jump on the bandwagon with that. And the whole global instability situation at the moment, I think, can be factored into the bigger picture. That people are using, these methods to their advantage. The other thing that I'm sort of seeing as well, protesters and activist groups previously have targeted companies. I think they're moving away from that at the moment, and they're targeting individuals and identifying individuals and targeting them specifically because they're able to find out more information about that person online and specifically target them. And there's been a massive increase in the targeting of C-suite executives, which in turn has seen an uptake in protective services across the globe.
And do you see this coming from increasingly different areas, or is it one particular area of motivated individuals? Because we hear in the news about radicalization, and yet that such a buzzword, and yet perhaps this is an area where online or social media can quickly motivate people.
I think there is a number of actors, and each of them has grown in the amount they are targeting the C-suite. And that goes everything from the lone wolf who's disingenuated with something that's happened in their personal life and is targeting that company for a specific reason, to criminals that are using cyber or digital techniques to extort money from executives, to nation states, certainly from a corporate perspective. When we're operating in 80 countries, we're dealing with governments. There is the desire by unscrupulous people to try and orchestrate things towards that. And then you just have the protest groups that are unhappy with companies for whatever reason that online or in person attack them. And I certainly think the face of protest groups and how they are targeting individuals has changed over the last 24 months.
And do you think that the protector might react to that in a blasé way? I don't mean to do the community a service, but they might say, well, just more threats. What am I to do as a protector? Do you think there's tools that can help them ahead of such an incident? Do you think that the promise of AI is that developed, for example?
I think there's two facets here, isn't there? The first one is, as a protector, you're protecting your course does not teach you anything about this threat. The executive protection, close protection course is purely based on physical. So none of the people coming into the industry or having gone down that training have any training in what's coming from an AI, digital, cyber perspective. However, there is lots of stuff online. There's lots of free courses about open source intelligence. Most companies will have an IT department, a digital, bigger companies like us will have a SOC or GSOC where you can link into and use them to help you protect your protectee on the digital and cyber side of things, which you obviously don't have experience of.
And I appreciate that, but for the protector out there that suddenly thinks, oh, this is fantastic, I don't have to worry about it because it's now the preserve of the IT department. How can we get them to get more involved or get more interested?
Because there is and always will be a physical aspect. Your role, however you look at it, that they are being targeted in a different way, there's always going to be a physical threat that you need to protect them from. And rather than say it's somebody else's problem, they should be looking at joining it up as, protection across digital and physical as one entity. It's almost like putting a holistic bubble around the executive, that all aspects of their life are protected.
Do you think executives will drive that? Do you think they will now? I mean, on the ultra high net worth side, in the more private family sector, sure, maybe they will just look to the one group to do everything. But in a corporate world, will they increasingly look at the world of EP and say, I expect you to look after my digital privacy and personnel protection?
The thing is, these people are so busy, particularly in a corporate world, that they don't think about it. In some areas, they need educating, because there are things as simple as, not joining public Wi-Fi when you're at a hotel, or ensuring that your laptop or your phone are kept locked away or given to your protector because they're as valuable an asset as you are. But on the other side of things, it's up to us to ensure that bubble is put around them so that they can function and carry on with their role within the company, not having to worry about whether they're going to be attacked physically or whether they're going to be attacked digitally.
And would you say that the tools out there promise that fusion? And if they do promise it, is it real? Because I do remember working on lots of defense projects back in the day, and that was the big thing: data fusion, making things relevant. Because there's certainly a lot of noise that would need to be cut through.
Data fusion from the executive perspective or protectee perspective?
Well, both cyber and physical. So some of these tools say, oh, I'll get all the different intel feeds out there for you, and I will give you something that's actionable. Is that just another world of the sparkly box, or have you seen solutions out there that really do cut through the noise?
I think, well, you've touched on another thread actually, which is actionable intelligence, which, there's less and less open source intelligence for various reasons, which we can touch on in a minute. But I don't think you can rely on AI monitoring social media and scanning protest groups and activists to ensure that you're not going to have a problem, because this whole digital and cyber action is targeting them, from their emails, from their trying to attack their Wi-Fi, searching where they're speaking at to physically turn up and intervene, looking at trying to find personal details by scraping the internet for home addresses, phone numbers. The amount of information that AI is now capable of finding is concerning and should concern the protector.
But that kind of feels a little disheartening in a way, because it feels that maybe the other side have a lot more firepower. I would hope that some of these tools could reverse that trend, or do you think that the software, the technology is just not there for the protectee just yet?
No, I think there are a large amount of tools that can be used to reduce the executive's digital footprint, to ensure that the right firewalls are in place to protect them from a cyber perspective. There are other parts of AI that we can use to our benefit, of such as tracking executives or linking access control and CCTV as part of the overall digital protection of them. And also, AI monitoring from an intelligence perspective is quite weak at the moment for various reasons, but you can still monitor, behavioral analytics, protest group analytics, and come up with a picture that works and use that intelligence as part of your planning for travel, for events, for everything to do with your executive.
And how does the modern protector then consider allocating resource in this world? Because there's surely a lot of chatter online about this or that executive, and how do they then say, well, this is a credible threat and this is just noise?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Because obviously with the increase of social media and the rise in sort of activist groups targeting people, then there's a lot more online threats and a lot more online noise towards executives. It's constant. And you do have to pick out or try and pick out what is relevant, what is real, and what is credible. And then look at putting those measures in place. Certainly from our perspective, there is a base level we put around our executives. And then depending on what intelligence comes in or how we assess that intelligence, then decides, what further measures we put in place.
And obviously, that makes total sense. And forgive me for being the poke the bear kind of question guy, but do you think then that there's another extreme whereby groups online could literally do a lot of posts and say, we are 100% going to turn up on this day to do this thing, and then not do it, and therefore they create commotion without much of a financial outlay?
So from a personal perspective, we haven't seen that.
Oh,
we've seen a lack of intelligence where they have turned up at events with no prior warning. So if you said your protection of the executive is intelligence based, then you're not ready for that threat that's coming because there is no intelligence. We've had other protests outside our headquarters that have been highly publicized and they've turned up in numbers. But as far as producing fake commotion to try and increase or drive a narrative, then we haven't seen that. However, one of the things we do look at is, AI being used to manipulate, whether that's through deep fake, manipulating the CEO, CFO's voice, producing something that causes concern within the markets, within the shareholders, that is untrue. And, there is the opportunity, if there was an incident that affected our company, for some of these threat actors to then jump on AI and create a false narrative, which affects the company's reputation, affects the brand, and ultimately, can affect the share value, which means that by using AI and deep fake, they can have an effect on or can manipulate the markets using that technology.
Yeah, which you would hope that in the coming years everyone would get wise to it and say, oh well, since an AI video is possible for any reason, we need some verification. But we don't seem to be there at this stage. What is it?
I do think on that though, I do think we are getting to a stage with AI that you do need a secondary form of validation for a phone conversation or some sort of instruction from a member of the C-suite needs to be verified, because deepfake is getting so good that there will be instances within global companies where they are caught unawares by a threat actor.
Yeah, that makes sense, and particularly those incidents you read about where the CEO apparently said to the accounts department, please transfer all this money, you 100% have to do it, which obviously is a big challenge. But then let's not address the promise of AI, which is quite a zeitgeist buzzword But what about the lack of intelligence? You mentioned before that perhaps things can come unannounced. How can we prepare for the unknown? And, you know, is it specifically and purposefully without open source intelligence? Is that a movement in itself?
Yeah, I think it is. I think a lot of the protest groups and threat actors have become aware that, companies use open source intelligence to look at threats that are coming their way, protests that are coming their way, and they've moved to alternative mediums to transmit information between themselves. That's one thing. They've become educated and wiser to keeping their movement secret. There are other aspects in play as well. One of them is recently that Meta, which has Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, have blocked open source intelligence scraping tools. So if you're searching or using AI to search for or monitor intelligence to do with groups, it will be blocked, or there'll be a lack of information from those platforms. That's one thing. The other thing is, at the moment, I think there's still a wariness or lack of appetite from corporate legal teams, which will err more on the side of caution in restricting or controlling security's capacity to look at stuff or dive into stuff through fear of legal ramifications.
Yeah, that makes sense, because if it's not just Googleable, then maybe there is an argument what is open and what is not open. We had a session on the podcast maybe a year or so ago on more enhanced background screening for potential employees, and even that was fraught with difficulties. But then we saw cases of people's stories not checking out, even with the usual checks. So that's interesting. What about people who want to go and do a lot of OSINT training? Because there seem to be so many providers on the market, and I can't help but think that one of the best training could be just do it yourself. What would your advice to protectors be if they want to either choose a course or upskill in that area?
So as you said, I mean, I haven't done an open source course, OSINT course. I have looked at them, and you say that the list of people you can do it with, some free online, some really expensive, some 3 days, some 5 days. There's a lack of obvious career path for getting into that field. But what I would say that I've been educated to, and it sort of sounds like I'm the biggest fan of AI ever, but the more in depth you get into AI, the more you can program it to search. And I think, and you can set your, I certainly, I use ChatGPT business that I subscribe to, and you can put lots of parameters within that. You can dive into it. And the more you use it and the more you play with it, the more it understands what you're asking. So I think from a personal perspective, to get involved in actually trying to get an AI tool to search what you're looking for and understand potentially how the threat actor is using that same tool against you is a good cheap starting point for somebody looking at intelligence.
Which is kind of reassuring, because it's not going to be the really fancy tools out there that people might be intimidated because they figure, oh, it's the preserve of the world of IT, as we said in the past. Maybe it is just asking better questions. So maybe let's hone in on that. Let's think that the solo protector out there, particularly, how should they better search? How should they coach AI to help them?
I think with AI, the thing to remember, it's only going to bring you back what you ask it. So you've got to be very specific in what you ask it. The more generic a question you ask it, the more it's going to go off at tangents and bring back information that's not relevant. I think there is almost an element of learning how to question AI and what works best within AI to get the results you want. And I certainly, if I'm asking AI a question about a specific event, or a specific incident that I wanted to look at, I'll come back and ask AI to ask me questions to improve the search.
Oh, that's a
So
good
I'll
way to
say
do
to
it.
ChatGPT, ask me 5 questions that improve on the report that you've given me, and it will ask me more specifics, which I will then be able to give it, which it will then use to narrow down the search.
I hadn't considered that because I've always thought, well, I'll ask it the better question, but if you ask it to ask you the details, then that can improve it. Have you ever had it hallucinate? Because I had last year one of them. I said, "Is there a lounge at an airport in America?" And he said, "Absolutely." So off I packed my bags to go to the airport early, and turned out there was no lounge. Is that a thing of the past? Hallucinations?
I think depending on which AI platform you're using, some of it is using out-of-date information.
Mm.
And I'm not sure on the stats of this, but I'm sure there are a couple of them that are running a couple of years behind on information that's uploaded onto them. So if it searches live and pulls it off of the internet, then obviously it's current data. But if it goes into its records, maybe that airport didn't have a lounge 2 years ago,
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
or
Yeah,
did have a lounge and now it doesn't. It's
yeah. I sat in a cafe. It was okay, but it could, that my example could have been worse if I'd have been looking for something more business critical. And whilst I am not an expert in this, there are considerations now about whether or not you allow the engine to save your inquiries and save the results, and how proprietary that information is. And at least with Claude, for example, if you create an artifact, is it visible to everybody else? So whilst not an expert and it's not advice, my advice would be to find some advice about proprietary considerations with what you're doing.
certainly from a personal perspective. I found it really useful within my masters to save all the data as I was searching it or using it, because it would then refer back to that data. And I can go into it now and ask it a question, and it will look back on the stuff that I did within my masters and pull information out of that. So it's constantly building its knowledge and database. Is a benefit. However, from a corporate perspective for my employer, I have to be careful about what specific information I put in there, because I don't want that saved on AI or to ask it specific questions that are relevant, to BP. So certainly from my perspective, I use it much more generically than specifically.
Okay. Well, no, it makes sense. And Shaun West, our fellow Circuit Magazine podcast host, did some very good searching based on his previous search results. So I'll allow him to, when he chimes in, I'll allow him to reflect on that, because he has good experience. But going back to our overall topic, C-suite, protecting the C-suite. It's kind of funny. I don't think we've done a session thus far just called protecting the C-suite, which, as I said, is kind of the motivation behind much of the Circuit magazine. Other protectees are available, of course, but what are these new activist threats that people should consider? So, for example, on the news, I have seen some people trying to, well, some people don't want to pay their council tax, and they believe that some video that they saw online says that's fine, you don't need to do it, when in fact that's not true. And then I also saw others thought it'd be a great idea to do citizens arrests on executives. What can you say about that kind of emerging threat vector?
So obviously, historically, the threat towards energy companies has always been Greenpeace, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil. And this year we've definitely seen a change in that. And I don't know if you saw on the news recently, a group has just come out called Take Back Power. So initially they put horse manure on the tree at the Ritz-Carlton. And then their latest action is to cover the crown jewels at the Tower of London in desert.
Ah,
of
yes.
which they both got arrested for that. So they are an offspring of Just Stop Oil and Youth Action. So that's a new protest group that's emerged within the last couple of weeks. What we are finding is there's definitely a synergy between climate protest groups and pro-Palestine groups. And I also think there's a synergy of, if we have a protest outside our headquarters, there may be several groups represented there. So they will have communicated that there is going to be a protest and, coordinated that. So they're not, I think previously they may have acted alone. I think now there's much more joined up thinking.
Which is probably challenging from an optics point of view. Even if I draw the comparison with celebrity protection, a fan rushing the stage is a true fan. So you don't really want to curb their enthusiasm. But of course, you need to protect the artist on stage. So there's some funny optics going on. I could imagine that if many different interest groups were protesting at the same time, that's challenging to balance, because some groups need to be handled in one way, some in another way, or am I overthinking it?
Maybe a little bit, but you are on a good track. I mean, quite often I will take an executive to an event, whether that's, a dinner where there's a speaker, or whether that's like an energy conference. It's down to the event security or the hotel security to protect or deal with the protester. My only interest is my executive. So if the protester doesn't get to my executive, everything else is down to their security, not me. I won't get involved. I won't get drawn into it. But on the other side of things, when I'm doing my looking at the venue prior to the event or the hotel, I have to reassure myself that they've got the measures in place to deal with whatever's going to come from a protest perspective. And they currently use multiple techniques, whether that's buying a ticket to be in the audience, causing a commotion at the front door to then storm in through the kitchen door, or actually getting themselves on the staff list, like we recently had at the Pink Ball at the British Museum, where one of the waiting staff, while George Osborne was on stage doing his speech, jumped up on stage and protested. So, different horses for different courses, but my only concern is the person I'm looking after.
Which is interesting, because then we could draw parallels with there were some American incidents where different teams were in a different corporation, and jurisdictional questions, and it's good perhaps if you just have the one focus, and of course jurisdictional questions in America are very different, but that does remind me of the one incident.
I know you touched on the Citizens Arrest Network, and
yes.
I know that some of your listeners won't, obviously be aware of that or know much about them. So, I'll go back to it just quickly, if that's okay. Is that this year, Citizens Arrest Network have emerged targeting water and energy companies for crimes against climate. And what they do, they produce a file of evidence, and then they try and serve it on that executive. So some examples are they've recently done a citizen's arrest on Lawrence Gosden, the CEO of Southern Water, and he was just walking into an energy event to speak. And they'd obviously found out on the internet he was attending, waited outside, surrounded him, and served him with the papers. Chris Weston, Mark Thurston from Anglian Water. They waited at the railway station near his house on his route to work to surround him and serve him with the papers and call the police. So they'd obviously done some sort of surveillance to know where he lived and his schedule to be waiting there. So predominantly water executives and energy executives. They've recently waited outside the offices of Enquest and arrested their CEO. Each time they arrest them, they serve papers on them, and then they call the police and hand the file to them.
And whilst we are neither of us are lawyers, I'd be interested maybe in a lawyer, if you're listening out there, telling us a bit more about procedures and process for this, because there might be somewhere in on the statute book provision to do things and privately, and there might not be. But for me, this seems like a careful balance between accusations of criminality and civil accusations. Is that perhaps a better way to frame it?
Well, for my police background and my police head, an arrestable offence was always, from a member of the public, was always something that was indictable. So I'm not sure the papers they're serving on these executives are indictable offences. Therefore, do they have a power of arrest? But from a civil perspective, I am aware that the Citizens Arrest Network have employed the services of Lee Day solicitors to prosecute the CEO of Thames Water for public nuisance. So it'll be interesting whether that actually goes ahead or goes anywhere. It's to me, it's a grey area from a legislative point of view, but from a protest point of view, it's definitely a different way of doing things.
Yeah, certainly seems to be modern hacktivism. Hacktivism used to be a word a decade ago. Everyone was a hacktivist, where they could spring up online and.
Well, Mark Thurston from Angling Water, they detained for an hour.
That seems to have different considerations.
It does.
Yes, because of course then there's optics and then there's bigger questions. But you see, I'm skirting around it because of course I am not qualified to give advice or comment in that way. But I would suggest that our community needs to think who does have the answer, and go to that person. Yeah, it's tricky because I do love exploring lots of thorny topics, but this one I feel they need to find a good source for said answer. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I totally empathise with them getting their point across. It's just how you do that. Everybody has a right to protest, and peaceful protest, we welcome. But when it delays somebody for an hour or ends up in civil court, it raises a different question, I think, like you said.
It's tricky. So where then does this leave us? We're thinking about the promise of AI to help the protector, the promise of AI against the protector and protectee, and new threats to the C-suite. Going into the new year, I generally don't like to do what's new for 2026 type things, but let's try it. Going into the new year, what kind of things do you think the protector is going to have to consider?
From a personal perspective, obviously we've looked at how we receive information about our executives attending an event or traveling. There's not been any single way of doing it up to now for our company. So, you can receive an email, a Teams message, a phone call to various members of the team. So there are single points of failure within that. And also, those people within the team are assessing that incident or event and making their own judgment as to what levels of protection need to be put on that. And that will come down to certain levels of personal bias. So what I'm looking to do for 2026 is, with the assistance of Acumen, is develop an online EP assessment tool so that anybody, BAs, PAs, managers, even ourselves, can enter the relevant information based on a number of questions into this tool. It will score low, medium, or high. I did look at health and safety in the 8x8 matrix, but I couldn't make it fit. So I decided to stick with low, medium, high as a scoring matrix. Whoever fills in this form, the EP team are automatically updated that there's a new event entered into the database and the score is given. The country security manager for where that event is taking place also gets notification of this. And our intelligence cell gets notification automatically for monitoring purposes. And then loaded onto the system are different measures depending on low, medium, or high scorings as to what we then put in place against the executive. So basically, everything is recorded in one place on a dashboard. So you can look at resource allocation, you can look at busy periods of the year, you can historically look back and see which events scored which and what measures were put in place. And ultimately, CC to executives love data. And if you can go to them and say, I am putting these measures in place because it scored a medium, or I'm not putting these measures in place because it scored a low, you can evidence why you did that.
That makes sense, because you can build the case. It's easy for them to understand, and it's also easy for you to, synthesize all the feeds that have been coming in. I think that's a really good shout.
That's my driver for 2026, and I'm hoping that once it's up and running, we'll be able to roll that out with other corporate security teams as a model.
I like it. Well, good. Jason, I really appreciate you coming on and looking at this. I feel it's been a long time coming, so it's good to have you on. I feel we've added a lot of value for the community, and raised a lot of really important points for them to consider going forward. I really appreciate your time. I hope to see you at one of our events soon. Won't name them in case, but
I'll be there in January.
There you go. We're looking forward to seeing you again in person. Thank you very much. This has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast. Well, thank you very much, Jason, and I've really enjoyed having him on the podcast, and of course on various panel discussions over the years. Shaun, what did you make of today's session?
I think there was lots that we can take away from that conversation, but I think one of the biggest themes for me is that executive protection can no longer be treated as purely physical. I think what stood out is how exposed these senior leaders are becoming now without even realizing it. It's not just in terms of travel or public appearances, but it's also through their digital footprint, their data, their routines, and the way the information circulates online. One of the things that was interesting, I think previously, I think you mentioned it in there, I've done a lot of open source intelligence training in the past. It was interesting that now some of these channels are getting switched off by the likes of Meta and different channels. So that's interesting. So people have got to pivot. It's like a game of chess, right? As soon as you find a way to attack someone finds a way to stop it. And the enemy always moves on. So it's interesting watching how things play out. And I think as AI, things are going to develop at pace. There'll be lots of moving and a grooving how these people get to you. But yeah, no, really interesting podcast.
Yeah, and for all the courses that people have been on, they're going to have to go on different courses now, aren't they? Like the landscape really has evolved. And one of the things I think, and this is just me wondering if it will be the case, but I think I'm not alone in this, is can we continue to simply be surprised when things happen? Or can we get ahead of the curve and go, aha, this action will provoke action, and therefore I am going to prepare myself. It just doesn't seem right that we go, oh, there is an act of workplace violence. This has definitely come out of nowhere. Like, it seems that we could potentially follow the breadcrumbs to prevent it or to anticipate it.
No, I think you're definitely right. And one of the messages I took away there, it wasn't about replacing traditional protection skills. It's about joining up the digital and the physical aspects. I think in life, honestly, in business, we always have to be more proactive than reactive. If we're reactive, we're on the back foot. And there is a lot of tools out there. So while AI also gives the threat actors a tool, there's also tools we can use to preempt threats and do things like that. And if we're not using these things, then we need a massive wake-up call. Our job is to protect our principals, physically, their reputation, family, whatever it is. And there's many tools out there we can utilize. If we're not utilizing them, why not? If it's from the executive side where they're not playing ball, then we need to educate them better. There's lots of case studies out there. There's lots of examples now of things that are going wrong through things that are happening. So as long as you can articulate that threat, articulate it correctly, with stats and data, examples, then we need to be doing that, because being on the back foot and reactive, we're always going to have a worse outcome than if we're proactive. And things still do go wrong. But I think when we mitigate that threat, the things that can go wrong, are less. Okay.
Yeah.
The impact of what goes wrong will be less because you've got SOPs in place to deal with it and how to go to the next level, step up to the next. So I think, we have to be proactive. If we're being reactive, we're not doing our job.
Yeah, and that requires a protector or someone working in intelligence to be au fait with the current culture, the current prejudices, the current ideas. There was this thing going around saying, if I never write down my name with capital letters, then I don't consent to anything, and I am this and this. And actually, I see that people attend my events and write their names purposefully all in lowercase. Now, you wouldn't think that that is noteworthy, except that could speak to a wider trend of protest in a different manner. If you're not down with the kids, so to speak, you won't know it. And that's why protest can happen anywhere from any place, and you just wouldn't understand why. And I used the example before, 80-year-old pensioners are trying to do something that may or may not make sense.
I was interested when you talked about the different groups now. So fundamentally, they used to do their protests individually as this group. They'd go up, they'd show up, have a protest in this place. But now with other groups, they're kind of collaborating together. So whilst one group might be against your principal or your principal's organisation, another group might not. But by default and by association, that threat can become bigger. Or you may just be passing because you're in the path of these organisations collaborating together. It increases that threat. So it's really interesting times for sure.
Yeah, back to the 1970s solidarity protests. It does seem like we're going round in cycles. But anyway, no definitive answer to this, but hopefully we've inspired protectors to look more closely, be more open-minded, go on more courses, and anticipate, which is always good. But separately, Shaun, what's new for you? What have you got coming up?
Well, I think it's a brand new year, 2026, and I think going back to the theme which we've spoken about being proactive instead of reactive, and I think this is what we have to be now when we set our goals for the next year. I think if you're just reactive and react to everything that comes, whether that's finding a new job in your career path as a EP agent or as a business trying to gain more business, if we sit there and we wait, the results we get are going to be a whole lot worse. But if we've planned prior and we're attacking January with a bit of zest, then we're going to be a lot more successful. So I think a lot of my December and early January has been about planning for 2026. And that's planning things personally that I want to do with my family, achieve personally, but also as a business. So a lot of planning, a lot of exciting things that I want to carry out individually and as a business. And can I put a name on them? Probably not. There's that much. I'm quite ambitious in the things that I want to achieve. But yeah, I think one thing I can say, I've come into 26 with a plan, highly motivated to make this year great.
I like it. Well, for me, I am excited to welcome a lot of the community, a lot of the BBA community, Circa Magazine community, to the 11th annual CP Tech Forum in London on the 29th of January. I have tried to focus it to make it useful. And not that it was never useful, but I want it to be more useful. So what I'm trying to do with every panel is go with scenarios, apropos planning, forward planning, anticipating, scenarios that we think people should prepare for, and case studies to demonstrate how someone dealt with something in the past. We're trying to be very, very disciplined to that format this year, so that people take away a lot of good case studies and scenarios. That's just one of the new developments. But it is exciting. Jason, by the way, will be on a panel on AI in threat intelligence. So it'd be great to catch up there. But I feel this is an evolving topic. C-suite protection, it is so multifaceted, but we really have to anticipate these threats coming from any direction. But we also have to decide whether or not we respond to them in a conventional manner, because of optics, because of legality, because of all sorts of other things. We don't know. And this is not legal advice, but this is just amusing. Great. So from Shaun West and myself, this has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.